People never learn from their mistakes. At least that's what my dad always says. He repeats it even more often nowadays since the protests on the Hyperion started. Both of my parents moved into the USS Hyperion when they were just children. They were moving in from a much smaller ship that, after leaving planet Earth 90 years prior, was on the verge of collapsing. Life on Earth was unsustainable, and all of us have heard the bone-chilling stories about the World War that started out and then wiped out more than half of humanity before the survivors finally decided to leave. The different ships from that first wave out of Earth landed on several different, smaller planets across the galaxy, but none of them were safe to be a long-lasting home. The best people could do was just stay long enough to build even bigger and more resistant ships, that could keep us alive until we finally found a perfect new home. In the meantime, this is my humble abode, the USS Hyperion. My parents have lived on the lowest habitational deck of the ship their entire lives. They were refugees. They barely made enough credits to feed me and my brother as we grew up. But as Hyperion citizens, the two of us, we had more opportunities. My brother dedicated his life to his studies on board until he joined his own teachers, educating the new generation of children born on our ship. Meanwhile, I was always fascinated by the inner workings of the ship, and I dreamed of exploring all the other decks and levels of the Hyperion. Who would have thought I would end up getting something even better than first class? After almost 10 years of studying and training, I am finally, officially, one of the pilots of the USS Hyperion. It's an incredible job, prestigious, exciting, and my greatest pride. All things considered, I guess it's not that difficult. Even if this isn't an exploratory ship, and we're mostly just, drifting along in space until we're informed of a potential planet that we could try to colonize. But there are always risks. And the thrill of leading this gigantic ship out of the way from a meteor shower a month ago earned me the respect and admiration of the millions of people currently living here. Unfortunately, when we got a week off work to spend time back with my family, I discovered that the rest of the staff of the ship isn't as well regarded by the passengers of the Hyperion. A pair of security guards escort me out of my residence at the high-ranking staff quarters, and then we go down the elevator to the levels of the ship populated by passengers. There's an overwhelming amount of security at every point. But people respect the guards, and despite the high tension lingering in the air, everything goes smoothly until we reach the lower decks. 2 more guards meet us there. And I just don't understand these precautions at all until the screaming starts. It comes at us like a wave roaring from the back of the vast public area at the center of the deck, and it comes closer and closer. I freeze at first, paralyzed by confusion and some instinctive fear, even before I know what I'm meant to be scared of. But one of the guards puts his hand on my back and pushes me forward. The 2 guards in front of me take defensive stances, and I have no idea what's going on. But then all hell breaks loose. I hear a loud splatter and I flinch, gasping. People are throwing rotten fruits at the guards. People come out of hiding places and run toward us screaming. They throw food, paint, and God knows what else. The guards are stoic, and no one gives me any explanation. It's a full-on mob, and I can barely make out some broken sentences. Go back! Let us go! Break the decks! It's all a mess. Angry faces everywhere, enraged yells, everyone pushing at the small circle of guards around me. Inevitably, I stumble down. Even the floor shocks me. I can barely see the sleek metal that covers the entire ship. It's all covered in ashes, dirt, and pieces of trash. This is a war zone. Okay, I'm starting to hyperventilate. I can't understand what I stepped into. 20 minutes ago, I couldn't have even imagined this nightmare developing under the same ship I piloted every day. Okay. Suddenly, one hand breaks through the protective barricade around. I scream and flinch backward, staring at the dirty fingers reaching out for my face. But then a different scream bursts through my throat, primal and frightened. Someone has grabbed a hold of my hair and is yanking me backward. I kick and scream, and I watch the guards around me delivering merciless blows at the people attacking us. I close my eyes tightly. I grit my teeth, and I beg any god out there that I will just wake up from this nightmare. Instead, I get a hard kick to my stomach. It takes my breath away. It leaves me doubling over in pain. After the kick, I get a brief second of peace. I gasp, and I feel warm tears on my cheeks. But when I look up at the furious crowd, someone finally recognizes me. It's Selena, the girl from the Cross family, I hear. Phantom hands return to my body. Much more careful, but just as strong and determined. I'm too tired and scared to put up a fight. But they don't really ask for my opinion before they peel me away from the protection of the guards. If there had been some semblance of order at the beginning, when they surrounded us and attacked us from a short distance away, it instantly vanishes. They forcefully drag me away from the guards, and I can't even yell anymore. All I can do is stare numbly as I watch the men succumb under the violent wave of the riot. The edges blur. The wild cacophony turns into a ringing in my ears, and I just lose my grasp of the world around me. I come back to my senses when someone slaps my face gently and shakes my shoulders. I blink slowly. I try and fail to stand up, but at least I'm in a chair now. Cautiously, I focus my eyes and make sense of the faces around me. Oh, thank God it's you, I mumble. Then I throw my head back, close my eyes, and relax under the sound of my brother's amused laughter, my mom's worried comments, and my dad passionately cursing every soul aboard the USS Hyperion. It takes a while. You know, I have endured the most rigorous tests to make sure I can work under pressure in the middle of outer space. I have the focus and strength to pilot this ship, these thousands of metals, these millions of people. I can safely take us through meteor showers, away from hostile pirate spaceships, land in a completely unknown land, and more. But I have never experienced something like this. This isn't some foreign force. This isn't something mighty and mysterious. This was human. Terribly and ruthlessly human. I thought this kind of terror only existed in history books. But it was going on right under our noses. God, after getting a warm, home-cooked meal, a strong drink, and a sweater stolen from my brother. I sit down with him to talk about the hell raging outside our door.
They're already too upset about what happened to you. It's best if they don't hear this.
Raymond says, explaining why he made me wait until our parents went to bed to explain in full detail the situation at the Hyperion. Yeah, they probably already know more than me anyway. I grumble, rubbing my temples and fighting a lingering headache. When did this start? How come I hadn't heard a thing?
I mean, that's part of the problem.
My brother started to explain in what I can guess is his teacher voice.
We've been complaining for years and years, you know that. Since we were kids, we've had to endure the abuse of the guards, the discrimination from the first-class people, and the indifference from the staff. It was all bound to explode someday. But then, at the first sight of a protest, everything immediately worsened. They cut down our resources. They feed us leftovers from the upper decks. They started to ration the electricity and the water service. It's inhumane.
I shake my head and tell him, I don't get it. Why is this happening? Who's making it happen? Why didn't I hear anything about it with the crew? Raymond smiled sadly at me, and the gesture made me roll my eyes. I don't need my older brother's compassion right now. I need an explanation about why our home is suddenly crumbling down.
It's natural, I guess. No offense, Carol, but just because you and your friends are behind the controls doesn't mean you guys are in charge. All of you work to get there. But some of the people in the first-class deck paid to be there. I mean, shit, their families paid to build this ship. Of course, they would believe they're entitled to privileges, but this level of cruelty, it's survival of the fittest, or survival of the people that pay the security guards. They want full control, and they want the refugees at the lower decks out of their ship.
I almost start crying when I speak up again. I can't be natural. You can't believe we're all naturally corrupted, designed to turn against each other eventually.
It's difficult to stay optimistic in these conditions.
Raymond sighed, thought about it for a moment, and added,
It happened on Earth once, you know. A war kicked all our ancestors out of it, and we still haven't found a place to settle down. If I were you, I'd get out of here as soon as possible. And I'd prepare myself to become a refugee on a different ship like our parents were when they got here.
I can't do that, I snapped. The Hyperion is my home. This is our home, Raymond. And I plan to stay until the end. I'm supposed to stay with my family for 7 days, but it seems all of us are underestimating the state of the protests happening on the ship. I can't leave. They don't let me. The problems outside are too intense, and I stay locked in my childhood home. On the second day, I ask my brother if he isn't going to work. He tells me,
It's not safe for the kids to go too often to school anymore. Education isn't a priority right now for the families. That should tell you just how bad things are.
On the fourth day, I find out that a civil war inside a spaceship is much different than what we read about in history classes. The stakes are high, and the weapons are too advanced. It's entirely too easy for someone with enough power to direct a gas leak directly into the bedroom of a leader from the resistance, poison our food, and even cut down our oxygen. On the seventh day, when I risk following my brother outside to talk with his friends, I learn a little too much about the war around me. The people from the lower decks are more desperate than organized. And entire sections of the ship are now completely inactive after several explosions that have obviously taken countless victims. Everyone has lost someone to this war. Almost everyone is ready to do whatever it takes to make a change, to burst through the upper decks and take control, but it's worse than that. Most of them want revenge. And I'm afraid to imagine how many will have to die until we find some peace again. It's on the 10th day that everything is turned upside down. For me, it starts with a call. I lost one of my bags during the attack the day I arrived, but there's a small backpack I never let go of, and in it, there's a communication device used by everyone that's part of the top officials of the crew. When I pick it up, I hear Nina's voice, our navigator and captain's assistant.
Miss Cross? Miss Cross, can you hear me?
I scramble to reply. It's such a relief to hear her again. Nina? Hey, it's me. Remember, just call me Carol.
Carol.
The navigator fell silent for a moment, and I hold my breath waiting to hear her next response.
Carol? You have to return to the pilot's cabin now.
What? Why? I guess you know by now, but Nina, it's a war zone out there.
Carol, you have no idea what's happening on the ship. It's getting much worse than you think. We need our best pilot with us right now. I need you here.
Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I can't say no to her, but I have to try to put up a fight, even though my voice is trembling. What about my family? I have to take them with me.
It's not safe, Carol. If you take them out of their quarters, you'll only put them in even more danger.
I open my mouth to reply, but someone else beats me to it.
I'll take you there.
Raymond speaks from my bedroom door. He doesn't look like a hopeful teacher or annoying brother. He looks like a man living a war, ready to sacrifice his life for me if necessary. Do not try to be heroic, Raymond, I warn him. You just leave me at the elevators to the upper decks. Nina will guide me from there and you'll return home to protect our parents. Can you promise me that? He hesitates, but even if it's a lie, he says,
I promise. I'll stay with them, no matter what. I'm part of this deck, Carol. They won't hurt me. I'm more worried about what's up there.
There's no time to waste after that. Nina keeps urging me to hurry. There's a ticking time bomb over our heads. I know it. I keep my goodbye to my parents brief, swearing I'll return as soon as possible, or send guards to take them somewhere safe with me. As soon as Raymond and I leave the apartment, I become well aware of the chaos raging on the deck. As they had threatened, the rebels of the lowest deck are fighting tooth and nail to move upwards, using force to hijack the elevators and the stairs and to absolutely annihilate the guards that dare to come down here. Raymond guides me through the rumble. We dodge the barricades, crawl over the floor when people start shooting, and hide in dirty corners when a new group of people barrels past us to take down a new guard or kick down a door. We get as close as possible to the elevators, but it just seems impossible to find a way through the battle in front of me. Nina, what do I do now? I yelled at the communicator. Raymond and I press our heads close and listen to the distant words.
Carol, look at the map. I marked out an emergency elevator. It's only used by the crew. No one else should know about it.
For a moment, that feels like an eternity. No one else says anything. The war in front of us fades into background noise.
I guess this is where we part ways, dear sister.
Raymond tells me, and he doesn't wait to see my reaction before he pulls me into a hug. For now, I speak with as much conviction as I am capable of. I'll come back for you. This will end soon. I promise. We step away from each other, with matching nervous smiles and fighting the tears in our eyes. Raymond returns to his hopeless battle, and I leave with a promise I can't keep. The short journey in the elevator is the only moment of peace that I get to cry about leaving my family behind in order to fulfill my duty as pilot of the Hyperion. When the elevator doors open in the first-class deck, I encounter a completely unknown world. It can't be true. I passed through this exact same deck 5 days ago. It was overflowing with security guards and safety measures, and now it's a rabid war zone. I can't move at first as I stare at the chaos waiting ahead of me. I'm sure the people from lower decks reached this level by now to wreak havoc. But some of the stuff I see, some of this is completely original work from the first-class people, which are just now showing the full depth of their barbarism. Every deck has a central common area from which different sections stem from. Even from the discreet corner where I am still inside the elevator, I can see that these people build a series of stages at the center of the deck. If it weren't for the fact that I'm watching it happen with my own 2 eyes, I wouldn't believe it. But they are executing people in front of a roaring crowd. While I barricaded myself inside my parents' home, the rest of the ship fully descended into madness. I watch, wide-eyed, as a man slits open the throat of another while standing on the stage. The victim's body falls limply to the ground, and the crowd, splattered by blood, continues to cheer as they drag a new man on the stage. He fights to the best of his ability, but he's extremely outnumbered. He looks around for a miracle, and, unfortunately for me, his eyes find me as I try to make my way through the edge of the crowd. The poor man's last words are a desperate cry for help. So loud and visceral, and his eyes are so intently focused on me that everyone within hearing distance turns around to look for the person he's begging at. The thing is, he didn't yell at me because I looked terrified and out of place. He asked for my help because we are wearing the same uniform. It turns out people aren't just fighting opposite classes on the ship. They have turned against the staff, too. Raymond was right. They believed they were more important than us, and they were willing to sacrifice anyone that tried to stand between them and their greed. I don't think I would have had much of a chance making it through there unscathed either way. Someone was bound to notice me sooner rather than later. But after the latest victim condemned me too, it feels like the entire crowd turned to me at the same time. I barely have 1 second to react, and I know that running would be completely useless. There's only one thing I need. Only one last hope. Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Nina? Nina, can you hear me? I start yelling even before my hands grasp the device that I kept in my bag. The first group of people jumps at me just as I grab the communicator. The clamor around me is too loud for me to be certain if Nina replied, but I keep trying to reach her and yelling, Nina, please do something! You have to help me out! Nina, fucking do something, please! In the struggle, I don't put up too much of a fight, so they use their joint efforts on dragging me toward the stage, instead of taking the device from the iron grip of my hands. It's my worst nightmare. Dozens of cruel limbs, cold fingers, and blood-stained hands reaching for me, grabbing, pulling, scratching, and pushing me. They lift me off the floor. They spit at me. They punch me as much as they can. They throw me at the stage, and I land on a heap, still clutching the comms device, still mumbling Nina's name. through the hellish roar of the war around me, I catch a few things. Kill her. Make her pay. Death to the crew. Death to the low ones. And then somehow I managed to hear.
Carol, hold on to something. Hold on tightly and do not let go no matter what. Do it now.
Somehow, my salvation turned out to be the fact that I was on that execution stage. I put all my hope on these insane individuals having at least built a sturdy enough stage to sacrifice their enemies. One of the pillars in the four corners of it was close enough to me, and after a well-placed kick to the man in charge of the execution itself, I leapt toward the pillar and I wrapped my arms around it like a lifeline. A second later, the sprinklers of the deck come on. We're all showered by cold water. But this just has to be a distraction. This can't be enough to end a war. The rain makes people stop for an instant and look up, right in time to catch them off balance when the entire gigantic ship tilts suddenly to the right. It's an impressive maneuver, and it requires full authority over the ship's controls to make this happen. It's necessary to tilt the ship to unsettle the artificial gravity, but just enough so the people can feel it, not to pull us heavily to the floor or let us float around. This is a deliberate maneuver, and it lets me know something very surprising. Not only is Nina doing this so only I can escape, but she also genuinely wants to mess with these people. I don't have time to wonder how this will backfire against us. Everyone slides down a little to the left, and people stumble against each other, but it's bearable until it isn't. Until Nina tilts the ship in the opposite direction. Twice as fast, twice as hastily. This time, people fall to the ground like dominoes, roll over each other, and drag along the ground helplessly. Nina keeps the ship almost entirely tilted to the side. For one moment, I'm pretty much hanging from the pillar of the stage, and I drop down easily to the floor when she steadies everything again. Thank God, I exclaim, rising up to my feet and looking for the exit as I talk to Nina. That was incredible, Nina. I swear I love you right now. Nina's voice manages to sound a little amused when she tells me,
Hurry up, Carol. They will get up any minute now, and there's a high chance they'll find a way to retaliate.
Following her instructions, I run across the center of the deck toward the elevators. When I'm almost there, I look over my shoulder and I see the crowd is recovering. A couple of people are already running toward me, but they don't manage to breach the distance between us. When I crash inside the elevator, I can already hear the roaring of the battle starting up again. But Nina has enough control on this ship to close the doors before I even press a single button. She automatically sends me up to the levels designated exclusively for the crew of the ship. I pass the staff's quarters, the different labs, and the specialized control rooms. Finally, the elevator doors open at the very top of this area of the ship. This is the place where only the captain, pilots, and a handful of officials are allowed. This is my new home. This is the command deck of the USS Hyperion. And it's completely fucking empty. Nina? What's going on here? Where's everybody? I ask with a trembling voice as I slowly step into the safety of the pilot's cabin. I'm met with nothing but silence. So I raise my voice and I demand answers. Nina, answer me. Then she says,
The answer will upset you.
I'm touched, but I can't help but groan. God damn it, Nina. This isn't the time to get sentimental. You know we're all fond of you, but you're the navigation system. You're an assistant computer program. I don't need sympathy right now. I need to know where the rest of my team is. There's a pause after my outburst, but somehow I know Nina will answer.
They left the safety of this room to try to stop the protest group on the other levels. They were sacrificed one by one, just like the members of the staff of the Hyperion. With the captain gone, I had enough authority and independence to take these initiatives. You were the only one left. You were protected by the people of the lower levels, but the barrier between both groups broke and I wasn't safe anymore. You were the only one I could save.
The news feels like a bucket of cold water falling over me. A stab in the back that I will never recover from. I think about our captain, the co-pilots, the engineers, mechanics, every member of the staff, every friend, every colleague, gone. Because why? Because a bunch of assholes believe they were better than everyone else? Because they had ancestors that paid an absurd amount of money to get on a ship like this one? No. I have to go back. That's what I eventually say. I have to go back to my family. I need to be with them.
I'm afraid that's not possible.
Nina tells me through the speakers of the room. She accurately guessed that I'm about to put up a fight. So she immediately adds,
In approximately 5 minutes, there will be a 99% chance that they're dead.
What? What do you mean? I don't even know if she heard me, because at the same time I talk, the entire ship gets rocked by a huge explosion. It's unlike anything I had experienced while training or witnessed from a distance or watched in history videos. Everything starts rumbling. It's the outer space equivalent of a deeply violent earthquake. I hear an extremely loud explosion and then a guttural groan that indicates the Hyperion is breaking down senselessly. The shaking doesn't stop. All my senses are attacked. The scent of smoke crawls through the vents, and I'm coughing when I try to argue with the system again. Nina, what happened? Let me out. I need to return to my family, I tell her.
I can't do that, Carol.
She replies, surprisingly gently.
The people from the top decks ignited an explosion to get rid of the bottom deck. It was a miscalculation on their part. The fire and destruction are expanding to every level of the ship, and very soon are going to reach this cabin. You have to activate the emergency separation protocol and turn this cabin into an escape pod.
Are you insane? I snap at her and start slamming my fist against the door of the elevator, which she keeps locked. Nina, let me out. That's an order.
I can't, Carol.
She exclaims right back at me.
You're the sole survivor of the USS Hyperion. I saved you. I couldn't do anything for the others, but I can protect you now. You just have to say the words.
No, I won't. I yell at her, and I fall to my knees, still hitting the doors. I cover my ears, but it's as if I can listen to Nina inside my head.
Say it, Carol.
I can't.
You can't save them. The explosion will reach you any minute now.
No, stop.
Carol, you know you have to do this. Please, just say it.
My hands burn because the metal all around me is heating up with the incoming hell moving up the walls of the ship. I can't stop crying, even as I yell at the empty room around me. Do it! Activate the separation protocol! Now what happens after that is kind of blurry. Maybe enough smoke made its way into the cabin to make me lose consciousness, or my brain purposefully blocks it out to spare my heart and my conscience. Maybe it's just impossible to describe the feeling of the pilot's cabin, shaking and creaking loudly as it disengages with the rest of the ship, activates the emergency engine, and pushes away from the body of the Hyperion to barely avoid a new blast of the explosion ravaging the ship. I have no idea how much time passes before Nina speaks up again and inspires me to get up from my place curled up pathetically on the now impossibly cold floor. She asks me,
"What are you going to do now?"
and I reply with a fiery confidence born out of grief and rage. I can't become a refugee on a new ship like my parents before me. I'm going to pilot this ghost of a ship to the nearest inhabited planet. And if I'm lucky, I'll get an exploratory ship next. I can't trust passengers and risk crew again. But I'm taking you with me. I stop to hold up the comms device that I kept throughout all of this. I can keep Nina's system there and take it to new ships and new planets with me. So I tell her, I'm going to find out if I can forgive you for saving me. And you? You're going to find out if you can keep me alive through our journey through the cosmos.
Sean Scott had lived at the North 96 base for close to 19 months, which made him the most enduring subject of the Titanium Project. In the grand scheme of things, the operation wasn't so difficult. First, about 10 months of training in the sophisticated installations built specifically for this mission. This was followed by a truly impressive surgery that integrated state-of-the-art technology into the human with the purpose of creating the perfect soldier. Faster, stronger, more resistant, more long-lasting. Finally, an additional year of training to fully complete the adaptation process to the new body. The main issue, some considered, was the near-isolation conditions of the entire procedure. Truthfully, Sean didn't mind. He was a stubbornly dedicated soldier. He didn't fear death. He only resented the possibility of it. This project would considerably decrease his odds of dying young. So what if he craved glory, longevity, and an advanced state of existence? He was a loyal soldier. He volunteered and was chosen for the Titanium Project. He swore he wouldn't complain about the highly demanding training, the separation from the rest of the world, the pain during the 2 months of recovery, the feeling of having his body corrupted and transformed, and then all his insurmountable grief. Every day, Sean woke up in the east sleeping quarters, passed by the bathroom in the middle of the second floor, enjoyed breakfast on the chair closest to the window, and only stopped training for minutes at a time for scheduled breaks and ingesting the assigned vitamins. The procedure and its healing process were done over 2 months ago. He was already a superior soldier. He didn't need extra meals, and he barely needed rest. Nothing hurt. Nothing tired him at all. All he had to do was to work for 10 months more on turning his body into a perfect war machine, and he would be done. The only dent in his perfect routine was the short period of time after training and before going to bed. The isolation at the North 96 base wasn't absolute. Every night, it was Sean's duty to call his supervisor, Luther Taylor, for a daily check-in. Luther Taylor worked in the Army's offices in a highly secure and overactive building in the middle of a bustling city back in the real world. For months now, he was the only contact that Sean had with civilization.
Luther, can you hear me?
Sean said over the speaker on the computer in the office on the second floor of the building. He had to clear his throat to get used to speaking after 24 hours of complete silence.
I'm here, Sean. How was your day?
Luther asked, attempting kindness even though the exchange didn't have to be more than another part of the cold routine.
Same as always,
Sean replied.
All exercises completed. Medical self-examination in the infirmary before and after training went well. No anomalies, malfunctions, or discomforts were detected. The project is progressing as expected.
There was a brief pause, and surely Luther was considering leaving things there. But then, Sean heard him clear as day. Luther asked tentatively,
And how are you feeling?
Sean hated that question. It suggested that there was something about his feelings that mattered and was worth discussing, meaning that it was significant for the project, or, more accurately, a threat to its progress. Still, he knew very well that lying was another way to sabotage the mission. He had to be honest, which was a relief, really, considering the overwhelming weight of his recent emotions.
Still paranoid,
he admitted, furious to hear his voice trembling already.
You know, I've been hearing footsteps all around the base. Too heavy to be rats, too purposeful to be pipes, or the wind or some shit. I hear them coming closer, moving faster. Closer, faster, more and more. And then, absolutely nothing. I can't stop my training to search the base. I just stand there, feeling watched, waiting for an attack, losing my mind. And then, at night,
Luther interrupted him, surprised, saying,
Is it happening right now?
Sean grunted affirmatively and then explained,
I mean, I've told you about the nightmares. My body has been perfect, but my mind is still frustratingly human. I still dream. Every time it's the same. I'm on that lab table. My body is cut open. The doctors dig around me, but I'm wide awake. The pain is so excruciating that I wake up screaming, and that's when this new part begins. The breathing. Is there something wrong with your breathing?
Luther asked him, sounding genuinely interested in a possible malfunction in the test subject, but Sean was about to disappoint him.
It's not me,
Sean whispered, trusting the microphone would catch the words and not the fear in his voice. He was trained for combat, to survive wars that regular humans couldn't, but this deep unease and psychological torture was really testing his patience unlike anything else in the world.
What do you mean?
Luther asked him, lowering his voice too instinctively.
I feel someone else is breathing around here, in the quiet moments, when the whole building is quiet and I'm just trying to fall asleep. There's a light breeze on the back of my neck. There's a whisper. No matter how hastily I search my room, there's nothing, Luther. Absolutely nothing.
There was a pause on the other line until finally Luther sighed.
These are still within the regular symptoms to be expected after the procedure, Sean. You suffered a great loss. Keep training and keep your routine. Remember that you are safe and remember that you are making history. Everything will be okay. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
That conversation repeated itself, night after night. Sean's body grew stronger and his mind became less and less reliable. The North 96 base was a fortress in the middle of the desert. Nothing and no one was meant to get in or out of it without explicit permission. But Sean couldn't tolerate the idea that these sounds, that this eerie presence was only in his mind. His body was covered in thin silver scars that tied together the artificial protective skin embedded into his own. There were titanium plaques encrusted in strategic places of his skull, spine, and chest. Cables were woven between his muscles. In addition to fabricated power sources, he had received extensions to his vital organs from a different body. He was better than human and convinced of that fact. He refused to believe that his own brain, modified and enhanced as it was, could betray him like this. There was only one explanation. Someone had sneaked into the facility. Maybe someone stayed behind when the doctors left after the procedure took place in the first year. They were taunting him, and they would pay the price for it. Sean waited until it was either the best or worst moment to fight back, when his nerves were on edge, when the footsteps got too close, when even while training he could swear there was someone breathing right behind him. It was now or never. He was just about to finish his training. The world outside was turning dark, and it was time to attack. A brutal scream tore through his throat as he gathered his strength and focused on the weights he was lifting and threw them across the room until they crashed against the wall of the building, making it all shake for a second. They were over twice his weight. They weren't even the best he would be able to lift by the time the second year ended, but it had to be enough to scare away any person that dared to go after him.
Where are you?
He demanded at the top of his lungs.
Who the fuck are you?
He debated his choices of weapons, but decided against them all. He volunteered for this. He trained for months for it, and he sacrificed and transformed his entire body to become a perfect soldier. If there was someone invading his sanctuary, he would rip them apart with his bare hands. He searched all over the training area, shouting threats, turning the equipment over, making a mess, and not caring about it. He could punch a hole through the walls. He could break the equipment, but he could not admit he was scared. Sean made his way to the second floor of the building, where he found the office, the kitchen, the living area, and the 2 sleeping quarters. He cursed loudly when he noticed the mess that waited for him. The entire floor was in disarray. Chairs were strewn across the floor, entire shelves were kicked down, tables were upside down, and all their resources were messed with. Apparently, this enemy had also decided it was the right day to make a stand. It was the most obvious attack yet. He had dealt with the misplaced items and odd little changes in his living space for weeks, but this offense was too bold.
I'm going to fucking kill you!
Sean swore as he searched every room.
Who are you? A doctor sabotaging the project? A low-class soldier jealous of this opportunity? A terrorist? A madman? Show yourself!
But there was nothing. Sean didn't see anything. If anything, the only sound in that building was his heart beating at a wild and unnatural pace. At least until he heard the footsteps again. He was standing in the hallway that led to his bedroom, but the footsteps came from behind him. When he turned around, he realized that the door that was always meant to be locked was wide open. Someone had entered the western sleeping quarters, Jackson's room. Now that was an offense that Sean simply would not tolerate. He cried out and ran all the way to that room yelling, determined to do whatever it took to neutralize the threat corrupting that sacred place. But as soon as he was through the door, he was consumed by darkness. It was unclear how Sean was unconscious. It was still night when he woke up. It couldn't have been too long. The hit on his head had to be something monumental to get him to pass out. That is, if it really was an attack and not just a malfunction of his body. Either way, when he woke up, he wasn't in Jackson's room or his own. He was in the office, and Luther's voice was filling the room.
Sean, are you awake?
Luther wondered over the phone.
What the hell happened?
Sean mumbled groggily. but his body was recovering at full speed and his mind was running.
Was it you? Where are you? Why are you doing this?
Luther laughed though, colder than ever before.
Do you think I would leave my comfortable office and the rest of the world just to give you a scare? Then what is going on?
Sean asked through gritted teeth.
I'm losing my patience, Luther. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Are you surprised?
Luther asked him.
You committed cannibalism, Sean. That's bound to traumatize a person.
A profound silence followed Luther's words. It felt as if the temperature in the room had dropped.
I thought we agreed to never call the project like that.
Sean argued with an unsteady voice.
No,
Luther snapped, but he didn't quite sound like himself anymore.
we agreed that 2 volunteers would isolate themselves in this military base, train until they became replicas of each other, and then a morally questionable surgery would combine their bodies into a perfect little soldier. But that's not exactly what happened, Sean, is it? Jackson was the volunteer chosen to be a leader, and you didn't like that. But you got lucky. He fell ill, genuinely. You didn't have to poison him, as you had surely considered. He was ill, and it was the perfect excuse to advance the surgery before things got worse, and they had to call off the entire project, right? Then the doctors got here. You convinced them that it was best if he was sacrificed and you got to be the lead. Either way, the result would be the same. The final product would be the same, right? Except you would keep your conscience, and he would just be scattered organs and blood supporting your enhanced body. Well, at least that's what you thought, right?
There was a new pause as Sean struggled to process all of it. There wasn't a single lie about everything he just heard. It was true. He had manipulated the project to his own advantage and had genuinely believed there would be no consequences. In the silence, he regarded his own body. He thought about the stolen organs inside him, the additional blood pumping through his veins, his expanded heart and brain, and every piece of him that was only more than human because Jackson's body had been sacrificed and fed to him.
You aren't Luther, are you?
Sean finally asked.
Oh, you poor thing. You haven't talked to Luther in weeks. All you hear is my voice in your head, just like you're doing now. I can knock you unconscious. I can take control, and I get to decide what's real for you.
Jackson said. It was definitely Jackson. His voice, his words, and his resentment. He sounded more bitter than he ever did while alive. Sean thought about Jackson in him, staining every inch of his skin and his insides, keeping his consciousness, manipulating him, and making him go mad. It made Sean forget all about the war. For a moment, he couldn't have cared less about his mission, his loyalty, his dedication to the army, and the Titanium Project. The only thing on his mind was if he really was as strong as they said he would be, but also as resistant as they guaranteed he would be. Did he stand a chance of trying to kill himself? If only to exorcise Jackson off his body. His train of thought was interrupted by a voice, which he now knew came from his very own mind, too.
Don't even think about it,
Jackson warned him.
There's no way in hell I'd let you kill yourself, Sean. I want to live, even if it's with you and through you. So, prepare to live for a very, very long time. Are you ready for the rest of our lives?
Lee walked into the tent of his boss, Ben Young, a headstrong but fair leader of the Rough Unchained group.
It's good to see you, Lee.
Young said.
Likewise, boss. Donald said that you had a task for me?
Yes, there are rumors Platinum Ring has fallen apart. People that used to live there have been running away. Some have come here, while others have been refugeed into other camps.
That was surprising. Platinum Ring was one of the 3 largest groups left in America after the virus epidemic of 2126. Usually when groups fell apart, it was small ones, run by deserters or others that broke off from larger groups. The breakdown of Platinum Ring and thousands of people leaving its enclosures was going to lead to chaos for a while. Lee said,
Ain't that something? So let me guess, you want to go down there and check out what's going on?
Oh, not only that. I need you to figure out how those people died.
Was it some revolt or a disease outbreak?
No. And that's the thing. According to the refugees, there was no revolt or disease, but thousands of people are dead. The few refugees that escaped said it was a slaughter. That Dante the Red has gone mad.
Dante was a respected figure and was well known. He led Platinum Ring for a long time, but one thing he was not known for was his violence, so that was odd to say the least. In a world like this though, everybody had to make that cruel decision, just like everybody else at some point. But slaughter? Lee couldn't believe that. He had to see it for himself.
Sounds interesting to me. Alright, I'll take the task, boss.
Lee's travel to the compound was made easier thanks to his mountain bicycle. They had cars and motorcycles, but those were only used for large-scale skirmishes or raids. Besides, a car would never get anywhere near the Platinum Ring, and a motorcycle was a megaphone to his location. He hated being seen and he preferred the secrecy of the shadows, like any good predator. Lee crushed the flowers and shrubs with his boots as the top of the wall peeked out over the hillside. The closer he got, the lower he got. He looked up at the 40-foot concrete wall surrounding the inner grounds. This was the Platinum Ring, but it was a disgrace. Lee's feet crunched into the plastic wrappers left on the outer reaches. Indiscipline must have struck before the final collapse, but what was more striking were the marks of blood and torn clothes. Especially with the clothes, there were so many scrapes and ripped pieces of fabric. To make it more horrifying were all the footprints. There were a lot of them, all going in many directions. Lee assumed that it could have been a stampede or a riot. All of this gave Lee an uneasy feeling, but he pushed that to the back of his mind. He stepped towards the wall with confidence. A distant gunshot made him freeze. Lee looked around. Nothing was displaced by any nearby shot, so it wasn't a sniper bullet. It looked like the party was happening inside the compound. Lee moved toward the wall. Using a grappling hook, he scaled the wall and found himself inside. To be honest, getting over the wall was too easy, but it was the inner layer of the Platinum Ring that was going to be difficult to navigate. More distant gunshots, but where was this shooting coming from? It was pitch black except for a few faraway lights beaming from a few of the barns around here. Lee eased the heavy beat of his heart with suppressed breaths. Giving away his position when he could barely see himself would be a sin. The lights in the distance were still a godsend and gave him enough hope. He stared from the shadow of the wall into the fallen fields of green. Maize and banana trees laid on the earth like trash. Many fruit trees were ransacked as their leaves crackled under his boots. Wayward oranges and apples bounced out of the way as he moved into the connecting fields. No one would dare destroy America's most prosperous resource of crops without running into problems with the other groups, but there were no enforcers to stop thieves. There are a lot of barns around him. This annoyed him, for he was going to have to clear each one on his way to the center of this community. Someone could easily hide inside and attack from there. Lee breathed out and continued until the wind picked up. An odor made Lee slow down. It wasn't the scent of rotting fruit, but a deplorable one that had phased between death or something worse. Lee lowered himself into a brush of maize behind a tall birch tree. There was a fallen banana tree several feet in front of him, and the leaves of that tree flopped up. They almost hid the head of the kid that passed by. Lee's eyes narrowed. There were a couple options he could take, and hitting the kid was one of them. But right now, he needed information, and that kid was his best option. Lee lowered himself and swiftly followed the kid. The kid wasn't a fool, nor was he as young as Lee thought. The kid was a black-haired teenager. Lee snuck up behind a tree and went ahead of the kid. He never caught Lee's presence when he put the gun to his head.
Don't move.
Wait! The boy yelled and fell over in shock. Lee froze and looked at the kid. This kid was harmless. Begrudgingly, Lee pulled down his rifle. Lee said,
Hey, kid, where are you from?
The young man looked around. Lee narrowed his eyes and raised his rifle to the boy's face.
Wait! No, wait! Quiet! Who else is around here? Come out right now!
Lee's intuition was right, for a woman exited out of the bushes right behind Lee, and in her hand was a spiked hammer with a long staff. That would have been a bloody end to his life if she got to him. She was a red-haired woman, so he predicted her possible fury was legit. But it was those golden eyes of hers that struck him differently. He never saw eyes so bright. Lee glared at the woman and said,
All right, miss, drop the weapon. Anybody else I need to know about? Come on, start talking. I don't got a lot of patience.
Which group do you work for?
She asked. He glared at her.
You're not in the position to be asking questions, miss. Now start talking.
If you came here for food or supplies, you're out of luck. The escaping residents took all that.
Lee asked.
And you didn't go with them?
That depends on if the second reason is why you're here. Are you here for the Titan project? If that's the case, then it's close. And that's why I'm still here.
Titan? What are we talking about here?
A living weapon.
Lee froze at hearing that, and he wasn't someone that was awestruck often. A distant shot echoed and shook him out of that fog. They weren't safe here. He swallowed and gestured his head at the kid.
Get the kid up. You follow me, let's go somewhere quiet. Because I'm pretty sure our location ain't safe no more.
So, he disarmed her of the hammer and a pistol. They made their way to one of the barns. There was no light, but the redhead quickly gave them light from her lighter. Lee said,
Keep the light from the windows.
She smiled and said,
Don't worry, there's nobody in the fields. It's the lab where the war is at.
War over what?
A monstrosity.
English, miss, and stop with the parables.
It was a science project that our leader Dante wanted them to do. It uses a new strain from the germ that killed off most of humanity to mutate people, give them abilities. The idea was to make their own super soldiers so that they could get an advantage over the other groups in the United States of America, and also to aid his plan to take over the West. So we're talking Canada, Latin America, and possibly, in the future, South America.
Lee never considered Dante a dictator or a crazed fool. But if what she said was true, not only was this crazy, this was straight up evil, to say the least. Lee asked,
Let me guess, something bad happened.
Yes, they were attacked. Nobody was supposed to find out, but somebody did. But it wasn't a normal attack. They were attacked from within. You could almost say it was like a coup. The residents wanted no part of it and left.
And you?
I'm a scout for the Cloud Union. I came here with a team that is now dead. My name's Aaliyah. Kid's named Virgil, and he was left here and is too scared to leave. Actually, he's not mentally okay. I'm not sure with what.
This was a bad number of problems Lee didn't need.
Leave with your new friend.
I'm going with you.
Miss, there is no way in hell I'm going to have you breathing down my neck. Either you leave, or I shoot you and the boy dead.
She shivered, but stood her ground. Aaliyah shook her head.
No, I can't. I go back without a vial of that thing. My boss is going to kill me. I must come back with something. So, I'm kind of stuck just like the kid. So I'll tell you what, I just want a vial. You can get yourself some too. I won't mention you to my boss, you don't mention me to your boss. Deal?
Lee didn't care and raised his rifle to her face. She backed up and raised her hands.
Hold on! I've been in the lab, I swear. Let me guide you.
This woman was too loud. Lee's finger touched the trigger.
No!
Virgil stood in front of her, blocking him from killing her. What the boy didn't realize was that Lee's rifle was so powerful, it could go through both of them with enough killing power to end this tense situation. But for some reason, Lee couldn't pull the trigger. It was one thing to kill a person from afar. He's done that all his life. But this close, especially when they were unarmed, he couldn't do it. Lee cursed his sentimentality. In this world, being sentimental was the best way to get betrayed or your throat slit. Lee pulled down the gun.
Call me Lee, but you better not betray me or hold me back or get me killed by making any sound, because we have hundreds of yards to cover, and I don't know who's out there.
Aaliyah chuckled nervously.
Yeah, sure. Right. Follow me.
Something told him this woman was lying, but he could not confirm it, and he was not exactly in the mood to kill somebody that he could not judge without evidence. Lee didn't like this at all, but he agreed to it, and in a small part of his heart, hope still burned. He was not sure what was going on in this demented place, but as they kept going through the ruined fields, the gunshots became louder. Thankfully, the woman was well trained, and the kid was not so bad, even though he stepped on a few branches from time to time. They came out of the grassy fields and onto the concrete and stone streets of Platinum Ring's metropolis. It was amazing to think thousands of souls used to live here, and the place was grand indeed. Houses and buildings were built of wood, yet stood tall in cube-like blocks with surrounding bridge paths, some of which connected over the derelict streets. There were a lot of dead bodies. Based on their clothing, Lee was sure they were outbounders from different groups. The only thing missing was their guns. The lab was close, and huge too, with a surrounding fence. Aaliyah said,
It's electric. If you want to get in, we have to go around and go through the opening the Mercury guys created.
Mercury deserters, the bane of everybody in Western America. Them being here was going to be a nightmare, but Lee pushed that to the back of his mind. The gunshot that sailed past his head almost joined it.
Down!
Lee hissed as they got behind a building. Virgil and Aaliyah flattened as the dull silence haunted them worse than any boogeyman. Lee glanced behind the gunshot hole. Based on the trajectory, it came from a higher elevation. Lee pushed his head around the corner and tried to find the sniper. Another gunshot. Lee pulled his head back and steeled his body, which threatened to break apart. His heart raced and blocked all sounds with its incessant drum. Aaliyah's whispers were nothing more than distorted screeches. Either the sniper was inside the upper floor of the labs or one of the buildings surrounding it. Lee had to find their location. Lee turned his head around and watched Aaliyah's mouth moving. He couldn't read her lips. Lee didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes.
No.
What do you mean, no? Let me help you.
There was no way Lee could trust this woman. No matter how well-intentioned she sounded on the farmstead, it never made any sense that she wanted to go back to this madhouse. She had a pointed objective and agenda. Aaliyah was willing to risk her life and even Virgil's life for it. Besides, how could she help him anyways? Her pistol couldn't shoot further than 50 yards, and the hammer was useless against a sniper bullet. Lee moved to the other side of the wall and peeked his head out. Another gunshot, but Lee pulled his head back just in time. He hated this. Lee pulled out the gun and gave it to her, but she held out her empty palm as she glanced at the other weapon, then back at Lee. This woman could not be serious. Lee said, "What the hell are you gonna do with the hammer?" She smiled.
Watch me.
Lee growled at himself but gave it to her. Aaliyah whispered to Virgil before running across the street. Gunshots rang out as the sniper tried to take her out, but she rolled into another alley. Taking this opportunity, Lee grabbed Virgil by the arm and they sped to the other side. They hoped Aaliyah pulled enough of the sniper's attention to avoid detection. If so, the bastard had to watch two different fighting positions now. Lee told Virgil to stay put and moved through the shadows until he neared the fence. That's when he caught movement. From a window, the light glint identified the bastard to Lee. Aaliyah ran through a hole in the fence and that bastard in the window moved as they fired on Aaliyah. Lee swiftly lifted his rifle, adjusted for distance, and fired. A yelp echoed as the bastard fell through the window. Lee inhaled deeply, and the weight lifted off his shoulders to know that was done. He got Virgil to follow him and looked for Aaliyah. Gunshots and screams rang out as they entered through the front door of this decrepit lab. Every 5 feet was a dead body. Carrying the kid through this massacre made Lee's chest pound with the pain of terror. Where was Aaliyah? She ran off and left them as soon as she got her weapons back. Lee knew he could not trust her.
Aaliyah, where are you going?
That female voice sounded close. Virgil made a sound and shrunk back. Was that someone the kid feared? Lee wished they could rest, but they needed to move forward. Lee went through the corridors and stopped at one end where a bunch of outbounders prostrated with their guns. He inhaled deeply, steeled himself, and spun around the corner, guns ablazing. Lee took out the group but caught a glimpse of Aaliyah running as she sped down another hall. He ran after her down a series of corridors and came into a large room of fallen tables riddled with bullets. He paused and listened. At the end of that room, he saw a glimpse of her hair. Lee called after her.
Aaliyah!
She jumped up from behind a table and waved at him erratically. Lee stared in confusion. A creak made him look to the side, but the clank of the revolver's hammer made him freeze. A strange woman with dreadful eyes of white glared at Lee.
Who are you? I don't remember you.
Lee cursed himself for getting caught like this. He needed to escape. Lee could push her arm away since she was this close, but with a gun that powerful, it was a close call if he didn't lose a piece of his head. Or he could lie. She seemed to be working with the Mercury nutcases.
Yeah, Brandon sent me with the second team after you guys took too long.
The new woman narrowed her eyes at him.
My brother killed Brandon.
Lee's heart skipped a beat as her face flexed into rage, but he already threw his elbow up into her arm. The revolver fired and left his ears ringing, but his head unscathed. She grabbed him by the collar and threw him into the ceiling before he pummeled down to a table. Lee's heart pounded in his head as much as his back and shoulders burned for life. What kind of pain was this, he begged? How the hell did she do that? Lee groaned and turned up his head to find out that woman was not normal any more than she was a monster. Her eyes glowed as her jaws and arms spread out into spurned spikes, piercing out from the breakage of the skin. Lee stared in horror. This woman flung one arm and sent a table flying as Aaliyah jumped out of the way. Lee's joints cried for mercy, but they would have to wait. He had to cut down this woman, but he could barely move. Lee labored up into a crouch as the woman stomped towards him. Virgil ran up behind her with a steel rod. Lee shouted,
Don't, Virgil!
She froze. Virgil swung the rod into the back of her head, which pissed her off more, but it was enough of a distraction. Lee fired into her head. She rushed him with her blood-stained head and smacked him into the floor. His back slid against the cracked glass. Her hand became a spear of barbed spikes that she was about to skewer him with. Lee's eyes widened in horror. A loud thud vibrated and blood splattered over him when her head got bashed in from behind. Lee froze in his moist disgust, laying in a sea of blood. Virgil jumped on him, which made his back cry for mercy, but he couldn't hate the kid, for he meant well. He groaned and winced as Virgil moaned and tried to wipe Lee's face. Aaliyah came over with her blood-stained hammer and asked,
Are you guys all right?
Lee spat out blood.
Of course not. Where the hell were you?
Aaliyah cringed her jawline as she paused.
Sorry I left you guys behind, but we aren't done yet. Dante is still around. His people and her people are still going at it.
Who is her? Who was that?
Dante's sister, Pauline. She was the one who brought Mercury into this. She was trying to overthrow her brother.
Ugh, this is ridiculous.
He lifted himself up and groaned in pain.
God damn it.
Dante has been protecting the vials. If I can get you one, I can use it to heal your wounds.
Lee pointed at Pauline's body.
And turn into that? Hell no, I'm good. I like being human. Just show me where this blasted Dante is so I can put a bullet in his head.
They continued their hunt, and the deeper they went, the more random goons they ran into. Aaliyah knew the way, but she seemed too determined to get what she wanted. The closer they got, the more anxious she was. Lee was just plowing through, ugly mug after another, knocking down each Mercury deserter like a pinball. Carrying around Virgil made this even more difficult. All he did was shiver and moan in distress. The kid lost that calmness once the gunshots rang out.
Lee was struggling with so many enemies from different positions. He needed to lean on his pistol more, especially when they got too close for comfort. For him, it was a job. For Aaliyah, it was important to stop Dante. He wondered why. Was it because of the danger of this mad project, or was it more personal than Aaliyah was willing to say? They soon neared their objective, and only one door separated them from it. Lee's kick bashed down the door, and before them was the great leader Dante. But instead of looking like a regal man of stature, he was a living, monstrous entity straight out of an inescapable nightmare. Blood was everywhere. It covered his white gown from the shoulders to the ankles. Lee was not sure whose blood that was, but he could guess it probably belonged to any of the many bodies littered on the floor.
Oh my! Aaliyah, you have returned to me,
Dante said, smiling from cheek to cheek. Lee flexed his jaw in rage as he glared at this liar.
Aaliyah, do you care to explain, or do you want him to do it?
Dante's smile disappeared as he turned to Lee.
Oh, so you made friends with our enemies?
Aaliyah said,
Go to hell, Dante. You don't control me or anybody else here anymore.
Dante made one step. Lee cocked back his rifle.
One more step and you will be in hell. And can someone please explain what's going on right now?
Aaliyah said,
I used to live here.
Of course you did. Why did you not leave?
I'm patient 0 for the Titan project. Virgil is patient 212.
This was insane. She had to be joking or something, but from the looks of it, she wasn't.
What happened to the other patients between the both of you?
Aaliyah pursed her lips and her eyes swirled with fear within their depths. Lee fired the gun. Dante flew 5 feet from the power of his rifle. Aaliyah and Virgil jumped back in shock. He decided no more questions needed to be asked. Lee breathed out in annoyance. Virgil screamed and threw around his arms wildly. Aaliyah shushed and tried to calm him down.
Shh, easy. Come on. It's okay.
She wrapped her arms around his head. Virgil said,
Not yet. What?
Lee asked. Virgil stepped back and pointed in front of him. Lee spun around, but it was too late. He got hit and flew across the room. Lee hit the wall and groaned from the pain.
Lee!
A burst of pain gripped him as he moved. His fingers fidgeted, and that's when he felt the emptiness of being disarmed. He hated being without his rifle. Lee tried to get up, but only managed to push himself up on his elbow. The blast of light traveling in crackling arcs over his face made him too shocked to move. Lee stared in disbelief as Aaliyah's body shined a luminescent light. Dante stepped forward, and what used to be his arms were sickened lumps of meat that reverberated waves across his length. Lee said as he rolled,
You got to be kidding me.
Dante chuckled.
You can't kill me. I'm perfect.
Perfect. Fool, my torture made you. And I'm gonna make sure all of you burn in hell.
Lee saw Virgil cowering in the corner of the room and his rifle close by. He pushed himself up and ran. Dante shot forward his ugly hand, but Aaliyah bashed into it. The dictator of this fallen empire cried out in a shameful display. Lee took up the gun and rolled into a shooting posture to fire 2 shots. They missed Dante's ugly mug when he pulled back into the darkness of the room. Lee reloaded, then pulled on Virgil's collar. Virgil wailed, but Lee wasn't going to have any argument right now. The young boy's presence here was going to be a liability. Aaliyah turned and followed Lee as they escaped from the room. Dante sent his arm sailing over her head and into the wall. Lee fired a shot into Dante's arms as Aaliyah ran around Lee. His enlarged arms swept the wall like a minesweeper, and fragments of the wall fell over Lee when he ducked. Dante came out into the hall on at least 8 appendages. He wasn't a monster, but a nightmare that dripped blood in a sprinkling rain over Lee's back. A scourge of light hit Dante and he cried in pain as he stepped back. Lee reloaded the gun and aimed from the ground up into Dante's jawline. He fired and Dante bashed his fist into the ground, but Lee rolled out of the way. Aaliyah kept pushing Dante back. It was like the light overcame her as she got brighter. She looked like a pulsar and less like a human. She was losing it. Virgil must have realized and grabbed her around the neck. He turned and threw her onto the floor. Dante reached after her, but Virgil stood tall and waved his hands. The wall bent inward and the wall surface cracked as if pressure crushed it. Dante's hand stopped and suspended in front of Virgil. It could not pass whatever invisible force Virgil put up. Lee didn't waste any time and bashed the end of his rifle into Dante's head. Dante's head recoiled back. Lee spun the rifle, clutched it, and fired. Dante's body collapsed from the headshot, and Lee dropped. The body morphed and bulged like a billowing storm until it burst down the middle and sprayed its bloody payload onto the floor. The thudding of boots directed Lee's attention to Aaliyah running past him. Lee stood up as Virgil walked toward him. He stared into the room, darkened by a brooding presence. Lee stepped inside and followed behind her deep into the lab. Aaliyah pushed aside the tables and cabinets. No light cascaded over her skin anymore. She was just frantic. Whatever desire she harbored was within her heart, and a distant childlike cry stopped Lee cold as soon as he heard it.
Yes, thank you.
Virgil stayed behind Lee as they watched Aaliyah open a 15-foot chamber with transparent glass over its top. There were several of them, probably more than 20. All of them except the one Aaliyah tended to were empty. She pulled out a baby and clutched it close. So that's why she was so desperate to get back here. Lee and Virgil watched her silently turn into a child herself as she rocked the crying baby and mumbled gently. As far as the vials, she fished out 2 of them, which were see-through circular containers with blue liquid in a myriad of veins in the center.
You should have told me,
Lee said. Aaliyah's smile cracked into a more somber expression as her lips flattened.
I didn't think you would do it for that reason. You got the vials, so your boss will be happy with that.
Lee asked,
where are you planning to go?
I'll figure it out.
That's bull. Aaliyah, I never thought I would say this, but you need to trust people more.
Aaliyah smiled and said,
You don't believe those words.
True, but I want to.
She nodded her head and said,
I trust you. Who do you fly with?
Rough Unchained. It's better than the open road, but when we get there, you'll be welcomed.
Lee wasn't sure if what he did was the right thing or not. As he looked at Aaliyah and Virgil, or even the baby, he wanted to just get out of there for their safety. She got up with Virgil's help, and all of them trekked back to the base. It was going to be a rough future with all those vials out there, but at least they had their weapons. All 3 of them.
Hey sci-fi horror fans, it's John. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Craving another scary story? Click on that video on your screen. Until next time, everyone, and remember, stay cosmic.